We're on with our next math adventure. Today we are working with percents. Percents are just another type of ratio, but what they do is they compare a number always to the number 100. So when we take a look at a percent, percents can be written as fractions. They can also be written as decimals. Today we're just going to focus on fractions. So we're going to go back and forth between a fraction and a percent and a fraction. Let's start with the easy one first. That's changing a percent to a fraction, because we know that a percent is a number compared to 100. All we need to do is take that 36%, the number goes on top, and whenever you see that percent symbol, that just tells us to put it 100 on the bottom. Now, it doesn't mean that our ratio is reduced to lowest terms, and we always have to reduce that ratio to lowest terms. So when I see this fraction, I'm going to divide both the numerator and denominator by the GCF, or the greatest common factor, to do it in one step. And when I divide both 36 and 100 by 4, I get 9/25. So there, 36% can be written also as 9/25. They mean exactly the same thing. It's a little harder to go from a fraction to a percent, but not much. So what we do is, if we have a fraction and that denominator can easily be made into 100, that's what we want to do. So I take a look at 6/25 and I look at that 25 and I think, I can multiply 25 by 4 and it's going to equal 100. So whatever I do on the bottom, I have to do on the top. I get 24 hundredths, and as soon as I have a number compared to 100, I can then just take that number, and then where I see that 100, I add my percent symbol. Now, not all fractions are easily going to go into 100. And so if I have something like 5/16, I can't think at all what I could multiply 16 by to get it up to 100. So then our other option, because we know that a fraction is simply a division problem, I take 5 divided by 16. Now remember, that numerator always has to go on the inside, the denominator has to go on the outside. When I go ahead and I divide that, I get this decimal, and I'm expecting a decimal. And so I get the decimal of 3,125 thousandths, but that's still not at a percent. And because a percent means per 100, it means I'm going to move my decimal point to the right 2 places for 100. So when I move that over 1, 2, and I replace that, I then get 31 and 25 hundredths percent. And you can have a decimal as part of a percent. You don't see it often. Usually people round those, but it's perfectly fine if that's how it comes out. Now, there are some common percent fraction equivalents that people just know. And so I put 2 sets of the most common ones on, where you don't really have to even figure it out. So if we go up by 20, so 20, 40, 60, or 80%, if I change that to a fraction in lowest terms, I get a pattern going. At 20%, my numerator's 1, but over 5. 40%, my numerator's 2 over 5. 60%, my numerator's 3 over 5. And 80%, my numerator's 4. So you can just kind of remember it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, always over 5. So that's kind of a common one. Most people know the 25, 50, and 75% ones, because we always have those denominators of 4, and it would be 1, 2, and 3. But remember, we have to reduce to lowest terms. So when I got 2/4 for my 50%, I had to reduce it by dividing by 2, and that's where I got my 1/2. So those are our common ones, and if you can memorize those, it just makes solving problems a bit easier. So then that brings us to some word problems that you might be able to see. And this is a perfect place where we can use fractions to help us solve. And lots of kids don't like to use fractions, but remember, multiplying with fractions is actually relatively easy. So if I get a problem that says find 40% of 15 pounds, well, that word of tells me that's multiplication. And so I can take that 40% and I can rewrite it as a fraction, because I know that common equivalent. So I'm going to change 40% to 2/5. I'm going to keep that multiplication, because that's what the word of means in math. And then I take 15. And remember, you can take any whole number and put it over 1, and that creates a fraction. And when I go to multiply my fractions, it's always numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator. Now, I like to reduce up front if I can. So I look on those diagonals to see if I can reduce, and I can. I can see right here, I could divide both of these by 5. 15 divided by 5 is 3, 5 divided by 5 is 1. So it changes really my fraction. So now I get 2 times 3 in my numerators over 1 times 1 for my denominators, which makes the math really easy. So I get 6 over 1, which is 6. So 40% of 15 would be 6. That makes sense to me because 50% of 15 would be about 7.5, so it seems like a reasonable answer. So in the end, you can take any percent and make it a fraction. You can take any fraction and make it a percent. It's pretty easy to go back and forth between the two of them. That is your challenge for today. Good luck.